I have an incredible treat for you today. This is an incredible treat for me today because I'm going to try to make him blush. But I have one of my mentors, one of my instructors, here with us to tell us about his incredible work. I found IEMT at a very pivotal point in my life, and it was actually as a result of having a very negative experience with EMDR. And on this channel, we prioritize trauma, trauma healing, trauma informed, trauma sensitive, somatic, all of that good stuff. You know the jargon. But I don't want to butcher the explanation of IEMT. So today we have the incredible Andrew T. Austin joining us. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you for having me.
How did you begin to even develop the concept of IEMT, and how would you begin to describe it for my audience?
All right, we start off with the description of what IEMT is. A lot of people say it's analogous to EMDR because think a thought, hold the thought, move your eyes, which is very similar to EMDR. I was aware of EMDR when I first started experimenting with it. In my experimentations, I discovered it could work really well. And I thought, hang on, that's nice. That's nice. I'm a therapist. I found something that works really well, particularly with historical trauma. I started to apply this rudimentary understanding that I had of get people to hold a thought, to move their eyes, and apply it to anticipatory events. Why would I do that? Because I had a lot of anxiety. Back in those days, I was quite an anxious person, probably still am to a degree. So I wanted to experiment, could this work with anticipatory anxiety? So I started experimenting on myself and with other people, and it didn't. It didn't do anything. So this is interesting because a mental representation can be altered quite profoundly with eye movements, but only within certain parameters. I started to then experiment to calculate those parameters, to work out when will it work, when won't it work, and when it doesn't, why won't it? Once we got that sorted out, we then look at, okay, when it does work, why does it? Why would it do that? Why we have a memory that's very vivid, people flash back to it, they're inside it, it's awful, somatic representation, going through the hell of the first experience as though it's happening again. Why does it change? And more importantly, what is changed? So I started codifying what I experienced, what I noticed. And as time went on, I started to teach that. And as I taught that, it started to get quite popular. Now, in teaching it, people ask questions. And they ask questions of things I'd never considered before. So they're, that's a good one. That takes you into a whole new area of exploration. Now, with that, of course, the material started to expand quite nicely. I then needed a name for it. Started calling eye movement integration, thinking I'd come up with that, thinking that sounds cool. It's already a thing. Didn't know that at the time. Then later on, my good friend Nick Kemp then suggests integral eye movement therapy. I went, that's cool. And so we named it. And then it started to evolve because it became popular, which I wasn't expecting. So that's my very brief summary of how it came about.
And I know you get that question a lot of how is it the same or how is it different than EMDR? As someone who had been through it, I will say it is vastly different than EMDR. I felt profoundly unsafe during my EMDR sessions, and it wasn't just a focus on this memory. It was give me a detailed account of everything you went through. You're going to repeat it several times and go through every sensation and feeling that you're having in that moment, which was beyond horrific. But the dangerous part was when I would go to drive home from my appointments and I wasn't grounded. I wasn't back in my body and I didn't feel integrated. So when I'd go to drive, I'd had almost 3 accidents, one where I almost hit somebody else. When I had to tell my practitioner of, this is getting some benefit, not enough for me to put my life at risk. So I wanted something to integrate with hypnosis, and that's how I found Matt Kendall and then IEMT in the association. And to my delight, you've got this whole segment that focuses around identity. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Right. So if we just going back to EMDR, and I'm sorry to hear of your traumatic EMDR experience. One of the limitations of EMDR is it's a fixed set of sessions with fixed application.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really matter what you it doesn't matter what you present, that's what
Yeah.
they're going to do. Now, I wanted something a little bit more flexible to work with the individual sitting in front of me, rather than have a rote methodology which is applied to absolutely everybody
Yeah.
without nuance being considered. There's another factor in terms of the development of the work, which is how it led into the identity stuff. So one of the issues in the client group that I often was working with back in the time. So I lived in a busy in the south of England in a city centre, and my client group was largely people coming from a poor background, low educational level, um, low economic groups who needed something that was helpful to them in very, very quickly,
Yeah.
but more importantly, didn't require them to have the sophistication required by psychotherapy of having self insight and reflecting upon stuff. And more importantly, the ability and capacity to articulate their suffering. Because a lot of people would just go, "Oh, I feel terrible, make me feel better."
Yeah.
And that's the limit, really, of what they're able to do. So I needed something that'd be quite simple to be able to work with people that didn't require them to go off and do a degree first in order to understand the work. Two components. There's how people feel, and there's how people feel about themselves. And how people feel about themselves is an identity thing. But there's also, I can hate myself for who I am.
Mhm.
And I recognize that for, I would say, about half the client groups I'm working with, identity issues were very dominant. They hated themselves. They didn't like themselves. They hated being who they were.
Mm.
Some people are just trapped with an awful personality.
Yeah.
They just can't help the way they are. They're just an awful, they're just got a preset that's not particularly appealing. And I saw quite a few of these people. So I started then to look at what can we do around the identity stuff, and then enter into my life the work of David Grove. David Grove will be familiar to some people. He was an Australian psychotherapist working a lot with trauma, metaphor based work. A lot of his stuff then evolved into what's now known as clean language through the modeling work of James Lawley and Penny Tompkins. And then other people have come along since then to expand the work. I met David at a very small workshop he was doing. I was one of about, I think, 10, 11 people in the room for a weekend, and it was fantastic. He was looking at identity, and his work was largely around the pronoun work that we now do in IMT. So once he introduced that pronouns can actually be a way into working with identity stuff, I knew immediately that was the missing piece. And so I took a portion of what he was presenting on that particular workshop and then developed that into the IMT work.
And then the other profound pillar of IEMT that I find really makes it different is that you've got the patterns of chronicity. I had never heard of that, and I've spent enough time as a hypnotist and a coach before IEMT that I couldn't describe these things, but I think I probably bumped up against thousands of times not recognizing them. How did that evolve?
Right. So the patterns of chronicity came a little bit later. So I had the eye movement stuff. That was the eye movements applied to feelings
Yeah.
rooted through emotion, through memory. Was how it began. Identity work then came in around about that time. A local doctor started to send me what generally are called heart sync patients. A heart sync patient is one of those people who will come into the clinic, and when the doctor sees the name on the list, their heart sinks, because these are the people who have, they'll often be in these cluster disorders like fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, IBS, complex regional pain, functional neurology disorders. These are collective umbrella disorders that basically say, here's your diagnosis. There's nothing we can do about it. Now, please leave us alone. But of course, nothing actually addresses any of the issues these people have. And they're often told you just need to relax. Here's some antidepressants. Here is something you need to take your mind off it. Often they get told it's a stress related issue, which indeed for some people it may well
Yeah.
be. But these cluster disorders don't get addressed very well in clinic. This doctor said, "Can I send you my anxious ones and my tired ones, the chronic fatigue ones?" So I had a good number of people from with two similar diagnostics. So all the anxious people, all the chronically fatigued people. And over the course of a summer, I saw, I don't know, maybe about 40. I couldn't actually tell you the exact figures, but I got to see a cluster of people who, by definition, are resistant to intervention because they've had all the referrals, they've been around the support groups, they've had the counselling, they've had the CBT, and so
Yeah.
on, but nothing's helped them. It enabled me now to start to see the patterns that they have in common.
Mhm.
And I started to document what are the pattern, what does this group have in common, what does this group have in common, what are the differences between the groups, and from there the patterns of chronicity started to emerge. The first one was what I now call the maybe man syndrome. Now, maybe man is when the person kind of sort of a bit like does it, but doesn't really do it. They go through the motions, but never actually commit to doing it. Now, that became very apparent very, very quickly. Now, I noticed something with those people. So, even though I don't really like this as a way of working, tapping was something I was getting a bit desperate here with these people. I don't know. I'm running out of ways of working with them. I'd get people to tap. Now, a person displaying this pattern of chronicity can't do that.
Mhm.
They end up kind of all over the place. And just to
Huh.
do a simple tap in this very specific place like that, they can't do it. They're all over, they tap all over the face. They're kind of tapping, but not as instructed. And I saw the various manifestations of this kind of kind of on the right track, but just derailed a bit. I started to see that quite a lot. So I thought, okay, let's document that one. And then over time, of course, I started to see some of these other patterns too. Once I got that, I then started looking in other client groups, where else are these patterns present? IEMT was then reformulated around the 5 patterns that emerged from that work.
Yeah.
The principle being this: some problems, most problems, if you do nothing at all, get better.
Mhm.
Time does most of the work. But there's others that no matter how much time passes, the person is still in the same position 10, 20 years later as they were at onset. Time does not become a healer. And often exposure to therapeutic intervention doesn't help them either. So I kind of figured if we can identify those patterns in that individual and remove them,
Mhm.
or address those directly, will time now become a healer? I'm I'm reasonably confident that is the case, and I've got it with
Yeah.
those particular 5 patterns. I've got it sorted. It's not going to work for absolutely everything. The one thing about the patterns of chronicity is they are not causative of the problem the person has, and I always have to go to pains length to explain this to people. Just because a person has patterns of chronicity, that's not why they're ill. That's not why they have the problems they have. They're not. It's not like I do these patterns, therefore I get ill. The patterns are adaptive because they have been unwell or had these problems for so long. Their adaptations now are built around protecting that system, and that's what makes it resistant to change. When we can get rid of those 5 patterns or address those directly, then we can do the change work much more effectively, or indeed just leave it to time.
Yeah. That's the part that I find profound. It's not just that we were able to identify those and that you're able to help the client understand that part of them as well, but also that it can be changed, it can be shifted, it can be alleviated. And that's really exciting for those people. And just for the layperson who's listening, patterns of chronicity, I'm going to put it in regular terms, is reasons that might prevent healing. And it's not that these are people that don't want to heal, they are. And that's why they stay committed and they stay present and they show up for appointments. Yeah. This work has changed my life. I was well into resolving complex PTSD with therapy, but also profoundly on my own. And it wasn't until, and when I say I tried everything, I tried everything. I became a yoga instructor. I was going to sensory deprivation tanks multiple times a week. I was doing every single thing you can humanly think of. And it wasn't until I experienced PSACs that I was able to release the tension from muscle armoring of PTSD. And if anyone doesn't know what that is, you'll know. You'll catch yourself defensively smiling. Your jaw will be tight. You'll have it in the neck and the shoulders, and it's your body that's locked into fight or into flight. Do you want to dig into what PSAX is and
Well,
explain it better than
there's
I could try?
there was a little part of me when I named PSAX, it was largely tongue in cheek because it was directed at two things. One is PSAX sounds funny, and the other one is it's emulating Eric Robbie's submodality eye accessing cues. So for those unfamiliar, in NLP, there's a thing about eye movements and how they move and what can be discerned by internal representation or from internal representation by the eye movements. And Eric took that to a greater degree in terms of what we can detect. So I thought I'll honor that by coming up with physiological state accessing cues, PSACs, physiological state accessing cues. So when people access a state, when they go into whatever mood, whatever emotion, there's a set of movements they will make that are fairly consistent every time they do it.
Yeah.
When we know someone really well, we live with them, we share our lives with them, we can often see them sliding into certain moods before they're even consciously aware of it. Now, we're not feeling their feelings. We're not inside their kinesthetic system to know what they feel, but we're able to observe some micro adjustments in how they're moving, how they're reasoning, tone of voice, that kind of stuff. We're most of us are extremely skilled at detecting it in voice because the stress in the vocal cords. Sometimes you can pick up the phone and the person says hello, and you know the person, you know what they're about to say because of the tone that they've just said with two syllables. It's an astonishing ability that we have. So physiological state accessing cues are a way of teaching a person that, I hate to say this, that the emotions they feel do have a choice element to it. Now, I wouldn't say that to a person who's in the middle of hell. They're in hell. Don't worry. You're just choosing this. You don't have to feel this way. It can be changed. No one wants to hear that. No one
Yeah.
wants to hear that. Because in that position, that's the last thing they want to be hearing because that's not going to help them. But
Yeah.
what we can do is by understanding how people access into emotional states, we can teach a person to interrupt the pattern and redirect that emotional state before it really gets hold of them. Because sometimes what will happen is we start to slip into it and we go, oh, I can come out of that. Or we hit a certain threshold and now we're in it. Here's two. Anger works that way, and hate. Both of those, when you're really in that state of anger or
Mm.
really in the state of hatred, they feel glorious. It's wonderful. And that's one of the problems about so many of these negativistic states is they're actually fulfilling when we do them. Years back when I was depressed, if anyone had said this to me at the time, I'd have been absolutely horrified, offended, angry. I'd have had all the reactions. That actually there's a certain level of enjoyment that goes with being depressed. Now, I
Mhm.
would absolutely have venomously denied that at the time.
Yeah.
Retrospectively, from the position I'm in now, I can go, oh, I luxuriated in it.
Yeah.
And it's awful. It's awful. And I'd never accuse or suggest that to anyone else who's in the state. But when people come out of it, somebody said to me once, there's a certain nostalgia to past suffering. And do you know what? When I said that, I thought, oh, I can relate to that. Anyway,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
physiological state accessing cues is a way of averting that. Um, so yeah, peace acts.
When I think about depression, oh, I did it well. I did it well, and it saved me from so many things that I couldn't outwardly say, "No, I don't wanna participate." But it's very rare that we look at it that way. That was astounding. I just had a huge aha moment while you were explaining that. It's like, "Oh, yeah, I did that. Expert
I think
mode."
there's another component with these very strong
Yeah,
emotional states. Whatever the emotional state is, because they're all emotions are neurochemical in terms of
yeah,
the biology of how they work. Almost certainly, those neurochemical things are addictive, and that's why we find people who are addicted to certain ways of being. that we know the person who's professionally miserable. They don't want to be anything else.
Yeah.
We all know that individual, whether they live in our street or
Mhm.
they might be married to them or whatever. Some people are just professionally like that.
Yeah.
Um, some people are just angry all the time. It's just what they do. It's just their default. And if you ask them about their anger, they'll deny they're an angry person.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of emotions that tend to work that way. They become the core person. It is their core state,
Yeah.
and it bathes every cell of their body.
I don't think I identified it as having an emotional state because I was doing a lot of the emotional processing, a lot of the work. And so for me, it felt like a physiological, I can't break this. There's no yoga pose. There's not enough hot sauna. There's not enough bathing in salt or any other thing that would unlock the muscles. And I would just wake up in that day after day. And as Matt was doing it as part of the drill through the training, it was incredible. I realized and I knew that was the one I wanted to pick to work on. And so to have that experience of, oh, I can engage in this, I can choose, I can have that choice. And sometimes I do tell my clients. One of the best ones was a lady that had a fear of driving on the interstate. And somewhere in her session, we had done some IEMT. I shifted into hypnosis. And then I reminded her, there's a choice. You've been choosing. So what if tomorrow you just choose different? And that was like the huge aha. So sometimes I do. I know you're probably cringing a little, but I do sometimes tell them that. But having that moment, exploring peace acts and realizing, oh, that I do have some option in this. I can begin to realize that this is so uncomfortable. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to feel this anymore. So it was profound, profound, profound.
The thing that I am always aware of with these things as well, in the wrong hands, these
Mm,
things can be weaponized to become gaslighting. I
mm,
just want to raise this one because I'm sure there's going to be at least one person out there
yeah,
going, "Oh, I can see how this where this could end up." In that
yeah.
now, what we can do once people can learn this material, they can then use it on their partner. So, say I annoyed my partner, and I go, "Well, you can change your state, you know."
I don't. I don't. He's,
We have a
he's had enough of
we
me.
have a manual for gaslighting. No, don't. No, let's not. We won't do that.
No, we typically leave each other alone, and that's why the marriage works. We don't bother each other.
I just
Yeah.
wanted to throw that out there because I'm sure there's going to be at least one person watching this
Yeah.
who's going to go, "I know what that could happen."
When you were talking about EMDR and how they have a basically a script that they're going to run through and it doesn't deviate, I remember the look in my therapist's eyes when I said, "Hey, I know you don't know this, but I'm in the sweet spot for hypnosis. Throw me some positive suggestions at the end of this." He looked at me like I grew another head in his office. And I
It's
just wanted that so bad. It's like, why leave somebody in that state?
it's a common problem when you have a therapist or coach who is defined by the therapy they offer.
Mm,
So if I'm an EMDR coach or an
yeah,
EFT therapist, or if I'm CBT, it doesn't really matter which. If I'm defined by the therapy that is offered,
yeah,
now what will happen is whoever comes through the door gets that particular therapy that I'm defined by. It would, and the way I can look at this, because IMC is not going to be suitable for absolutely everybody, but it has
yeah,
uses in some of the time for some of the people.
yeah.
Imagine I'm a knee surgeon, and you come along to me because you've got a problem with your tonsils. And I go, okay, we can get that fixed, right? Just roll your trouser legs up, and we'll have a look at your knee. That's pretty much what the EMDR people are doing. It doesn't matter what you present to them; you're
Yeah.
getting EMDR, whether or not your problem is structured in a way that EMDR is structured to treat. Unfortunately, a lot of the developers of various therapies and interventions. Now, I'm not going to decry EMDR.
Mhm.
It is a highly effective model, and when it
Yeah.
works incredibly.
In the place
The
of nothing
problem
else,
is
it was
the
helpful. Yeah.
practitioners and the trainers of EMDR aren't looking at what is the structure of what this therapy is,
Mhm.
what structures, what cognitive, emotional, experiential structures does it change, and how does it change them? And are you, the client, presenting any of those structures that I can change with the EM? No one's thinking like that. And it's probably true for IEMT practitioners, to be fair. They're probably defining themselves as IEMT practitioners. It's in the title. And then that's the only thing they do for everyone that comes through the door. But I would like people to move way beyond that, to actually pay attention to what is the structure of this person's issues? What is the structure of that person, indeed?
Mhm.
And what are the best methodologies by which we can then apply to that individual
Yeah.
to help it? So it's crafted to each individual as opposed to one size fits all.
Yeah.
When I'm on my rant, the same person, so if you had presented exactly the same issue to somebody who does EFT,
Mhm.
regardless, you would have found yourself tapping your cheek and saying,
Yeah.
even though I have whatever, I deeply and completely accept myself,
I can't.
regardless of whether you actually already deeply and completely.
Yeah.
I mean, if you'd gone to see a homeopath, you'd have got a little bottle of magic water or a little magic
Yeah.
calcium pill. If you'd gone and seen an osteopath, they'd have cracked your neck. On a
Yeah.
chiropractor would have ripped your back around the. Every therapist would have addressed it from a completely different operating position. And yet they would all say they're getting to the root cause.
Mhm.
Well, how
Yeah.
many root causes can a problem have? And maybe there is no such thing as a root cause.
Yes. Yeah.
Maybe things are a lot much more cybernetic than that. We don't have root causes. Like that's where it starts, and we deal with. Nah.
Yeah. I mean, when I look at complex PTSD, it was complex for a reason. There were multiple different areas that fed into each other. It wasn't just one.
Mm.
And it's not surprising to me if that is the same for many, many other things, not just PTSD. Yeah. It's been profound. I've had the whole journey has been amazing. I had the pleasure of taking advanced training with you. That's been blowing my mind. I do still occasionally run into some challenges, and I had one just about 2 weeks ago. And I did actually send him your information because it was clearly beyond my skill set. And I'm wondering if you might give me your 2 cents on how I might have navigated this differently. But this person has been struggling with such intense and deep depression that they weren't able to do IEMT. And it wasn't that they had the patterns of chronicity that I was seeing. His ability to actually hold a memory, to explore memory wasn't there. His visual capacity was really diminished. And you wrote an amazing article on that right during that same week. And I was like, well, this is a beautiful little, synchronicity right here in my lap. Um, but I'm wondering, and I don't think he would have been a good client for hypnosis either. So I had to tell him, like, he's been so shut down from feeling his emotions for so long, not just the negative ones are impacted. And I said, I can absolutely do this with you, but it's going to be a longer journey than I'm used to doing. And I gave him some time to see if he'd be up for that. How would you have navigated something like that scenario?
Always going to be hard to answer this question without the person in front of me
Yeah.
for assessment. But depression presents a particular problem. One is there's a semantic issue. So most people who say they're depressed aren't, according to clinical criteria.
Mm.
Most people, it's very easy to get a diagnosis of depression without, or even to self-diagnose without actually any of the physiological criteria being present. Depression, medically, depression is a physiological disorder. It is not, oh, I'm upset, I'm feeling sad. So one of the things that happens is called cognitive retardation. Essentially, the brain cognitively starts shutting
Yeah.
down.
Yeah.
It can take ages to formulate a thought. Speech patterns slow down. So
Yes.
they speak very, I can't even imitate how slowly some people will speak. There will be huge gaps where they just stare for like 30 seconds, 45 seconds, and carry on as though there has not been a 30, 45-second gap.
Yeah.
So it's a huge slowing down of stuff. Other aspects are significant demotivation. Now, this is a huge problem in depression because we need people to be motivated to start doing something different in order to get them changed.
Mhm.
The very condition itself fights against that because it demotivates against change. And so it's a huge problem when people are into the clinical stuff. And then you've got all the sleep issues and so on. So then you've got the fatigue of having yet another very, very long night of no sleep.
Mhm.
When you have a person like that, and now we're going to go, right, we want you to find a feeling. Well, I haven't got anything. Everything's shut down. All they have is one single core state of absolute emptiness and despair.
Yeah.
Um, they don't have a memory base. Oh, okay. Have you got any memories of? Wow, it's hopeless. Now, when you got to put
Yeah.
that sort of situation,
Yeah.
it's going to the condition itself is going to dramatically affect what you can do with it.
Yeah.
And when people are in that sort of position, this is where medical treatment absolutely is the go-to. Now, I know amongst alternative therapists and so forth, they're very much against psychiatric medications and so forth. But I've seen on Facebook and I've seen the research that antidepressants are no better than placebo. Well, it's not quite true. A lot of stuff
Mhm.
gets shared around that actually is not entirely the complete picture of what's going on. When antidepressants are given to those sort of physiological symptoms of depression, they tend to work
Yeah.
very, very well.
Yeah.
When they do something to people who've got mood disorders and they're just moody and miserable and they don't have the physiological stuff, then it's going to be fairly hit and miss, probably at placebo level. So so sometimes medical treatment is hugely advantageous to help kickstart
Mhm.
things along. But there is another approach that does show very, very good results. And Ivan Tyrrell and Joseph Griffin, who wrote a very interesting book with an extremely strange chapter in it called The Human Givens. These
Mm.
are these are two psychologists who are based up in Bristol in the UK. Now, I used to know Joseph Griffin a long time ago, so I did some training with him. This back in the 90s. And they were looking a lot at people in that state of depression.
Yeah.
Here's the thing: when people have all those physiological symptoms, if you deprive them of sleep for about 24 hours, which is not, they probably go, I haven't slept for weeks. They're getting some sleep and they're getting the early morning waking, classic 3:34 every time. It's the same time every morning.
Yeah.
If we keep them awake all night, the following day, when body clock is now back into day mode, those physiological symptoms disappear.
Hmm.
Now, that's been observed for like over 150 years. That's
Wow.
been a recognized thing. Now, obviously, so the cure for depression is never sleep again. Obviously, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
But so the question was always, what is that? Why
Yeah.
does depriving a person of one night full night's sleep alleviate those physiological symptoms? Tyrrell and Griffin proposed it's because people are depressed by their dreams. Now, it's not the dreams that depress them. The dream activity they're having, which is neurological activity, is what is now causing those symptoms into the daytime.
Hmm.
So their way of alleviating those symptoms is to teach a person to go into daydreaming, which is basically going into an alpha state.
I had to learn
And
not to
if
daydream.
say again, sorry.
I had to learn not to daydream so frequently.
Right. So you teach a person to be able to go into alpha state, and once they're able to achieve that, then they're often much more amenable to working with.
Yeah.
One of the problems we have these days, we have cured the problem of boredom. Boredom is now cured by these little devices everyone carries around in their pockets, which has got an infinite amount of information and pictures of cats and little pug dogs as well, and cute little
Yeah.
videos. I can hear yours in the background there. And the whole world can be accessed, and people and social media and the infinite scroll. People don't get bored anymore. Now,
Yeah.
neurologically, this is a disaster because we're not wired, we haven't evolved to have constant stimulation. Um, when they call it, what is it, raw dogging, when you go on the train or a
Yeah.
flight and you don't use your phone, you just sit. That's now become a thing and
Yeah.
good, even if they
Mhm.
had to call it whatever. I mean, what a ridiculous thing. But it doesn't matter. The fact is that people recognize that younger people, that all this screen time isn't really helping.
Yeah.
So the other one is if you're a child who daydreams a lot, you're going to get medicated.
Somehow I didn't. I'm an anomaly.
Horrifying, horrifying.
I was
So
given progressive muscle relaxations. I really lucked out with the person that I got, and that was just luck of the draw.
mm. So go back to depressive. These are some of the considerations I'd be having with him, and it may well be that in order for me to do any intervention to help get him to do change work, we have to prepare the patient first to get them into a position whereby change work can be enacted.
Yeah.
Sometimes to go in straight into change work is too much too soon, and there's a
Yeah.
lot of other preparatory stuff that needs to be taking place first.
I could
So
see it
that's
was
just my
painful.
general sort of thoughts on that.
Yeah, I could see it was painful for him. He really wanted to. He wanted, of course, to please me by following the directions, and I didn't want that for him. And I could see it was causing a degree of major discomfort. There were
The
some interesting things in there. So he is a very highly functional person, able to go to work, but he had a bizarre schedule in that he was going to bed very, very early and waking up around 4 a.m. consistently for his job. And I wonder if that factored in too. But there was definitely the slowness and the cognitive ability and to process. Yeah.
mm. There was something I had something else. It's gone. It was in and it's gone. It will come back to me later.
You were talking about how we might want to delay the change work because of the discomfort of it. And so, and that was the route that I was taking too, was to say, I'm going to need you to do something weird. I'm going to ask you to practice visualization every single day, and we're going to do some emotional intelligence work. You're going to sit and actually define what am I feeling and to begin to label this, because that was going to be a new thing for him. So that's
One of the
the way that I was going.
There's a number of common features within the depressive experience as well, and it's people's internal representations. Often they lose brightness and they lose color,
Yes.
and so people's internal visualization representations become quite weak, quite not very enticing. And of course, if you want to feel bad about stuff, make it all grey and dark,
Yeah.
because that's a really good way of one day they'll make a horror movie that's brightly lit. There's something about our internal representation. So to get people to depressives to brighten up their internal pictures and to increase their visualization ability, this was something that was actually suggested to me in part in the department at the hospital I used to work in when I was going through depression, and really struggling a bit. And I got colored fluorescent cards, the kind of stuff you get in the children's section of the art shop. Just a really bright fluorescent card, lots of different colors. And I started littering them around the buildings and places, like where I lived. Put one in the kitchen, one in the bathroom, put them up high, put them up high. And then the task was this: I'd be at work. Okay, what color is in my bedroom above the door? Now, in order I've got to remember being in there, and I've now got to visualize the bright color. Now, obviously, to begin with, that's a pretty poor, couldn't do it. Now, I might know what the color was, but that's not the task. It's not getting the answer right that's important. It's remembering it visually.
Yeah.
And at the department I worked in, they let me put the card up around the ward as well. And some of the other staff were practicing with this too. So it was like there were several in the staff toilet, for example. Now, over time, I can start to visualize a lot better and mentally walk around the buildings and remember the colors. Now, whether I remembered the correct color isn't really that important, but I'm remembering bright fluorescent colors. And this is just a little trick you can do with some people to get them to improve their visualization ability. Now, if you're up against the modern thing, which is, oh, I can't visualize, I got aphantasia. Every now and again, aphantasia does the rounds on social media, and people put it in their bios along with their pronouns and all their other neurodivergent diagnostics because it's trendy. Most people are not aphantasic. They're not. It's just one of these modern things that people jump on. But if I'm up against a person who goes, "Oh, I can't do that, I'm aphantasic,"
Yeah.
it's game over. Because what they've done is they've diagnosed themselves and that they've said, I can't change, so I'm not going to. I've got a diagnosis.
Yeah.
But for most people, this is something that's worth experimenting with. But I don't argue with the people who give me a diagnostic frame that said they can't do it.
I'm really glad you mentioned that. I am curious, why did you put them up high?
Right. So this is where the different lobes of the brain work. So the parietal lobes at the back, visual processing areas. Watch the body; they tend to do down. Um, we've got temporal lobes, which are sort of around about here. Um, they do up. Here's a weird little thing. If you experimental, Todd Murphy and Michael Persinger, two neurologists, they experimented with the Shakti, the God helmet. If you stimulate the lobes, people have religious visions, and they're always up. Basically, these temporal lobes do the up. That's why God and heaven is up there and not under the ground. Frontal lobes are very much involved with sort of things like speech and language comprehension, um, decision making, time awareness, consciousness, all of the higher logical functions. Lots of other stuff going on around the brain. By putting them up, essentially what I want to do is stimulate more sort of towards the front and activate looking up. Up is good, down is bad. Going up in the world, going down in the world. Looking up, things are looking down. We're
That's
we're
right.
we're, we're socially climbing, we're socially descending. So up generally is the way to go. And
So
look
I
at
was
posture in depressives. Boom,
Yeah, that's
down they
right.
go.
And
Mm.
that was something he was doing, and so I had tried multiple times just to see could I break state, and I could. And so then I was curious about the aphantasia piece, and I thought, let's just see how he would do with hypnosis. And so I did a collapse anchor. Visual ability in that way was fine. It was specifically tied to his memory and what he was feeling. And so unknowingly, I guess I kind of did that. And then that's the exercise I gave him. And I wanted to see what was the internal, what was he feeling? And then we changed it just for him to have that experience with hypnosis. Um, but man, it was tough. And I thought, oof, what would Andrew do? Like I
Other
had a
other
moment.
areas other areas that are always worth considering, and I would recommend if anyone pursues this route to do a lot of study and research in this area, and that's the vagus nerve. So polyvagal nerve theory has become very popular in recent years, and there's a lot of merit to the work. There's varying ways that polyvagal work is enacted, but also there's the external devices of vagus nerve stimulators. And they're a bit the implantable ones, the medical. These are really expensive. You need a surgical team to actually. So they're off. You know, they're not going to be available for people readily. We know they work. The clinical data on those is unequivocal. That the vagus nerve stimulators for a lot of conditions are huge. As an aside, PTSD, there's something called the stellate ganglion nerve block. Now, the stellate ganglion is a thing in your neck that is involved within the nervous system, one of the branches of the nervous system. That when people have PTSD with lots of somatic symptoms, you can basically switch the somatic stuff off with some lignocaine injection. Again, you need a full neurosurgical team for this. Injecting into that particular nerve root or the notches, and if effectively they anesthetize that response. Now, it's astonishingly effective for people with somatic PTSD. So there's a lot of stuff that's physiological. Now that effect obviously wears off over a short period of time, but with repeated applications, it can be life changing. Vagus nerve stimulators can do the same. Now, there's a number of vagus nerve stimulators. There's lots of different types on the market. Again, research here is now hit and miss. Implantables work. These non-implantables, which are, I think, overpriced, they appear to work some of the time for some of the people. But when they work, they're astonishing. So we know that we can stimulate the vagus nerve um, through behavioral interventions too. There's lots of things we can do around breathing exercises, humming, there's all sorts of stuff. Buddhism is largely built around stimulating the vagus nerve, a lot of those meditational practices. So for some people, that may well be a way in as well. That vagus nerve stimulation for things like depression, PTSD, is a huge area of research opening up. Um, and while I'm on the subject of physiology, the human gut biome is the other. There are probiotics you can buy, of which probably the majority of probiotics on the market are just placebos. They won't do anything. They will do absolutely nothing. They won't even make it to the gut because they never make it past the stomach acid. However, there's a whole bunch of probiotics that are on the market that you can buy that are designed to bypass the stomach acid quite well, and they will relieve a lot of people's anxiety because a lot of the neurotransmitters that we create start in the human biome and are manufactured there. And so there's a number of probiotics that are readily available. You get them on Amazon that will actually improve your gut biome and produce better neurotransmitters to reduce anxiety. And a lot of clinical data behind those. Neurologically, anxiety and depression are fairly similar to each other. There's not a neurochemically, there's not a great deal of difference between the two states when we look at the brain chemicals. So the gut biome and people's diet is another big area to be looking at for people.
I think we saw that a lot in COVID, didn't we? Yeah. People were feeling bad, they would eat poorly, and then that whole cycle would just ramp up and continue.
Mm.
Yeah. You've been writing the most wonderful articles. I will make sure to include that one about the gut biome and the other article about neurostimulation. I don't think that's what you called it, but I'll include those in the show notes for
Well,
people
for
so
the
that they
anyone
can
that
see
wanted to
those.
know more, if they go to the IEMT website, which is integraleyemovementtherapy.com, on the training section, there are two courses that are available for anybody for free. One is on the human biome, and one is on the vagus nerve. And what I did with those was to distill out the practical stuff from the research. So it's not all the technicals, which I don't really understand. It's not all of that stuff which you need a degree to comprehend. It's all the stuff that is basically simple, practical, what works, what doesn't work, what you can do, and so on. So and anyone can access that. You don't have to be a member of the association.
And I'll include that in the show notes too. So if you're seeing this on the replay, you're going to have access to those things and be able to find them. Kimberly, I can see that you're asking, and I will include the link a little bit after we are done recording here. Uh, I'm just astounded. When people ask me about IEMT, I immediately say, I don't know, the man's a wizard. I don't know
Wish.
how
I
it all
wish.
works, but but I'm grateful it does because it has absolutely changed my life. But then also, I've had the ability to help so many people in a way that I wouldn't have had the ability to do with just hypnotherapy or just coaching or
Mm.
just the yogic breathing. And it's profound, big, big changes. And it's
This is something we
amazing.
hear reported a lot from people who learn the material, which is they may well have had clients who they've not really been able to help. And I know most coaches and therapists don't like to admit that because everyone likes to think everyone they see, they've created miracles. Everyone's been transformed by their therapies. That's not true. That's not true. Probably the most people haven't been transformed.
Yeah.
Some of the people have been helped some of the way. But the IMT has opened up for so many people they've been able to create rapid change for individuals when previously every single other thing that has been attempted has failed. And the change happens in a very short period of time. And that we hear that time and time again from trainees. It's absolutely fantastic to hear. The danger, of course, is it becomes the grand theory of everything, which is IMT will fix everything, which isn't true. I wish it was. I'd be a wealthy man if that was the case. But it certainly is very, very useful for some of the people. And one of the best bits about it, it's not invasive. It doesn't take like 20 sessions that you've got to commit to. You'll know within 1 hour of time with a practitioner whether this methodology is going to be helpful or not. It's not one of those things where we go, well, we'll see how you get on. We'll see if you're having any changes, and maybe we'll come back next week and we'll have another go. And no. You will know during the session whether it works or not. And an experienced practitioner will be able to know in the first 10 minutes, of course, because we have a set of criteria by which we can measure whether it's suitable for that particular individual.
Yeah, that's essentially what I've begun to do is do a demo first, and I'm upfront. I say, it doesn't work for everybody, but the people it works for, it is profound and it has changed many, many lives. And I never know, and sometimes it feels a little bit grandiose when I'm telling people the results that I've had for myself, for my clients, um, and I've started to soften the confusion experience that can happen because for those who are really good candidates, there is a moment of total disconnect where they're looking for that old impression. And I laugh because I see eyes looking at the ceiling and they're going from the left and they're going to the right and they're trying to find the thing.
Trying to
And it's like, no,
re-access it and they
it's
can't do
gone.
it. Mm.
That's right. It's gone. Yeah.
And they might sometimes going to go, but will it come back later?
No.
And I'll go, might do. And what's
You
going to
do.
happen if it does? Oh my goodness. And then I'll keep challenging. This is another one of the patterns of chronicity, of course.
Yeah.
Then I'll keep challenging them. Have you got it back yet? Try harder, try harder. And of course, anyone, I mean, obviously
Yeah.
anyone can relearn and be re-traumatized. Obviously,
Right.
that's reality is just because someone's had successful therapy, it doesn't guarantee the rest of their life is beatific and free from negative events, which is so many people seem to think that I've had therapy now for the rest of my life. I live in paradise. No, I've met people. I've seen it out there. Things get dangerous. Um, but largely, once the problem is resolved, it's resolved.
Yeah. And the fun part is we don't know how many things are going to be resolved. I've seen people for one thing and they've resolved a few other things that they weren't even targeting in that moment. And it's like, I
Yeah.
really don't know what it's going to be. That's part of the fun.
I think one of the great bits that people find is, especially when the problem is triggered within relationships. So the person may have, say, past trauma. They're in a relationship now, and of course, they got all the mood swings and sleepless nights and all loss of appetite. All the stuff that comes with trauma is not really conducive to a really happy relationship. And of course, it's pretty tough on the partner who has to deal with all this, and then they never get to have a bad day. They're not
Yeah.
allowed to have a bad day because this is the person who's having the bad day. So
Right.
that's hugely problematic. When we alleviate that, the suffering that that individual with the trauma has got, then obviously relationships improve. When relationships improve, then they start to go out more. They start to interact with the world differently. When they interact with the world differently, they often get a better job and things. So you get from sometimes just one piece of a person's psychopathology, and we remove that damaging piece, it networks into every area of their life, starts to improve and then we get this snowball effect. Or we see the other one, which is now I'm no longer so traumatized, feeling sorry for myself all the time. I can realize that all these people around me are idiots and they're not my people. I need to be somewhere else. Seen that a few times.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where the
I
person is
think
no
I may
longer
be going through
dependent.
that as we speak.
I think
It's been
I
a
think many
reoccurring
people
event
will
lately.
relate. Yeah, yeah. I went to
Oh,
therapy. It wrecked my marriage and made me a happier person. That kind of stuff.
that's
Yeah.
right. That's right. Oh, goodness. The other thing that really astounded me, because I've not been in the therapeutic realms for a very long time. I practice hypnotherapy, I practice coaching. So, and it was almost intimidating because IEMT is what's considered a provocative therapy. I had never heard that term before. And so here I'm learning that I'm going to have to present in a different way. I'm going to have to check certain things. What can you share on that? Because that was an interesting experience.
So there was a guy called Frank Farrelly. He was a social worker in Mendota State Hospital over in the States. And he was working with the hopeless cases.
Yeah.
The ones who are dumped in psychiatry, no one wants to work with them. They just get warehoused forevermore until the money runs out. Well, Frank was working with those people and needed to develop a better way of working with people. One of the things that's not really allowed in therapy, it seems to be, when you're being professional, is humor. Can't humor, and you can't call people on their nonsense. It's all about how do you feel about that, and how does that make you feel. And I'm very professional. I'm a blank slate. Well, Frank kind of ripped up the rule book on that. Now, anyone watching this, just trust me on this one. Don't even think about it. Go to Amazon or any other bookseller online. Go to Frank Farrelly, um, Provocative Therapy. Just buy that book. It is going to be the funniest therapy help book you have ever read in your life, and it really encapsulates Frank's approach. Now, my good friend Nick Kemp did a lot of work with Frank, popularized his work, and then has carried on the mantle. Frank died a few years ago, and Nick now carries that forwards with his work. Frank's stylizing basically it's not a case of just poke fun, have humor. There is actually a very strict model to how it is done and what is done. So it requires a degree of training and a lot of practice to get it right. Because when we try and be funny, the chances are we're just going to be offensive. So provocative therapy isn't what most people think it to be, unfortunately. And there's a lot of people out there who've read the book and think they can do it, and they offer trainings, and it's just terrible. It's nothing to do with what Frank was doing. So Frank was a big influence on me from really the early days of me being a therapist, because I got his book when I was a student, and so I was very lucky in that I was introduced to that quite early on. What I'm aware of is that the blank slate, where we are the caring, sharing professional who give nothing away of ourselves, and yet we expect our clients to be open, honest, genuine, and authentic in the relationship we have with them as we operate from a blank slate, is ridiculous. So, one of the things that I tend to do is I will prompt for and provoke people's patterns of chronicity, because that's what I'm targeting the entire time. I'm not really just looking to chase symptoms and then create symptom amelioration, because that's what EFT is. EFT is just track a symptom, try and dampen it down a bit. Um, a lot of therapy does that, just constantly chasing symptoms. What I'm looking for is systemic change. I want to look at the core system of the individual. Who is the person who has the symptoms, and what has to be true for that individual to maintain these symptoms on a daily basis? In order for them to be suffering the suffering that they've got, what has to be true for them? And so that's what I'm talking to, not the symptoms. Um, it's very hard to actually explain sort of the provocative styling without actually doing it for real with people, and that I can't really fake it. It's one of those things. Yeah, it emerges from the relationship with the individual in the therapy session. It's not something that's a technique that is applied, for example.
I wasn't aware just, how people pleasing I was, and so learning about that, it felt, so edgy, and it's like, "Ooh, there's a new, edge for me to push, there's something for me to work on," and it has its moments. I don't always try humor. Sometimes I'm just working on the blunt piece and giving them space to see what's gonna emerge, because then it's gonna be helpful.
There's a classic thing in psychiatry. There's a classic thing, and I spent some time working in psychiatry in varying forms, and there was something I noticed about when does a patient get medicated. Now you've got your standard, the stat medication. They'll have like this thing 3 times a day. And that's their prescription. The staff are given the what's called PRN, which is the opportunity to give additional doses over up to a certain set of milligrams so many times in 24 hours without having to call the doctor. That's PRN medication. When we map out PRN medication against staff stress, what we know is that when the staff starts feeling stressed relative to a particular patient, that patient gets medicated more so than based against the symptoms the patient has. So one of the things I did on one particular place, it got me sacked, which was I plotted how many milligrams per day were given in PRN medication to all the people in that particular unit. There's only like 10 people in the unit, 10 patients, and I mapped it against the staff rota, and you could tell who is on duty on any particular day by the number of PRN medications given. So I was able to demonstrate these things aren't being given according to clinical criteria. They're being given according to the personality and the emotional well-being of the individual. So when a member of staff who's highly stressed comes on duty, they're more likely to medicate. We had one guy, Pete. Oh, he was fantastic. He was a man out of time. If there was the quintessential 1960s hippie, this was Pete. Pete was incredible. Now, of course, when he's on, everyone's behavior changes because he's so chilled out. He's just the most coolest dude you're ever going to meet in your life. Everyone loved Pete. And it affected everyone else's state. There was somebody else, I won't name her. When she would be on, everything was different. You've seen One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And you get the idea. Now, what I recognized was that some personalities and their internal resources of staff are not more powerful than client symptoms. Now, if I am more afraid of your symptoms than you are, I cannot help you. I cannot be of help to you. So I must not I have got to be a person who is not intimidated or threatened by the presence of your symptoms. Now, if we now map that across to the therapy room in the talk therapies, we'll now see what are the triggers of therapeutic discomfort in the therapist. Crying. What's the first thing that happens when a patient cries in front of a therapist? The tissues are handed over, and the therapist says, "It's okay. It's okay to cry." Who are they calming down? It's themselves because they're not comfortable with expressed emotion. And this is a well documented phenomenon that therapists are and mental health workers are not comfortable with expressed emotion. Another thing they're not comfortable with is laughter because somehow that's against the therapeutic contract. To have a good joke and a laugh about stuff, oh, that's probably not real laughter. That's a cover up. And so we start to see that therapists are intimidated by emotions. And that's largely why they became therapists. Because now what they're doing in the people pleasing and so forth, what therapists are doing when they're doing the people pleasing, keeping it all nice and calm, easy tissues. The tissue, by the way, when you hand a client the tissue, that's the international signal that says stop crying. While simultaneously saying it's okay to cry, while signaling you better fucking stop it because we don't like it when people cry around these parts. It ruins the furniture. And so what we've got to, and this is a part of the provocative therapy thing, is we have to have the ability to handle expressed emotions from other people. And if we can handle other people's expressed emotions, then we can actually help that person. When we're people pleasing and we're blank professional slate, we're trying to eliminate emotions. Most of them our own. Our own. Because the other one is that awful, and I've experienced this as I think most practitioners or therapists of every discipline has, where you're doing the work with a person and you realize it's not working. Nothing you're doing is going to help. And you just know this is a complete failure of a session. And you get, and as you're like committed to it, we've got another 25 minutes of this. I better keep the professional face up and just hope it will. Do you know what I do? I go, do you know what? This ain't working, is it? Complete waste of time. You've come all this way, you spent all this money, and you get me, and I'm completely useless at this. Hasn't helped a bit, has it? In fact, should we just stop here? Now, once I do that, most therapists won't do that. They have to maintain the blank face and the professional. I'm just like to be honest. Well, this is a waste of time. Um, let's see what happens next. Let's work with now what comes out of that. Because quite often what will happen is that when I drop the act, guess what? So do they. So do they. And quite often that's the thing that then enables the connection for change work to take place. And that I would say is the essence of provocative therapy.
Yeah.
We drop the act and we're just two humans actually having an interaction.
I do feel like that is what makes your work, whether it's IEMT or whether it's metaphors of movement, that is what makes it different. And all around very refreshing. I know you have events all of the time. You've got trainings all of the time. The thing I love most about the association you've created is there's continual education. It's like you knew I was coming. No, she's going to be a pain in the butt and she's going to want stuff. But there's always something. And so as a practitioner, it's amazing. Do you have a certain kind of student that you would welcome into IEMT? Is it easier
Honestly,
if they have a certain foundation, or does it even matter?
no. The way I designed IMT was that anyone can learn it without prior training in anything. And that was a deliberate design because again, going back to the client group I had back in the day, I needed it to be immediately accessible to people without having the complexities. Now, this has limitations, of course, because if people are going to come on what is a 2-day training um, and think they're a full-fledged psychotherapist, and people do, then obviously that's not going to be the case. But the training is open to absolutely anybody. Now, to be a licensed practitioner approved by the association, you're only a practitioner of IMT. We don't govern anything else. We need after training there's an assessment people have to do, and largely we are then looking for two factors: can they replicate the work? Are they sane? That's pretty much what our key criteria. Because as anyone who's worked in these areas will know, on training courses, you get a good mixed bag of people. And some of the people who are there because they need to be for their own purposes. And I fully support that. But sometimes we'll need to stop some of those people ever becoming a licensed practitioner until they've done more work on themselves. So there's a checks and measures in place for that aspect, but anyone can do the training.
And I would
And so just
highlight
on that one,
yeah.
with the association, I've been very, very lucky with the association 'cause we've got a lot of members. It's enabled me to get these guest trainers in. It's enabled me to be able to reach out to all these other people. We've had some fantastic speakers, which I wouldn't be able to do that. I mean, who am I? But oh, we've got over 1,000 members. We'd like to come and talk, and it's a great way to actually for me to meet these people and so on. Anyone who joins the association, you can join even if you haven't done the training. You join as an associate member. All those events are open to you, and anyone is welcome to be an associate member.
They are very, very beneficial. It's really enhanced my confidence. It's enhanced my approach, and it's really opened up my world a lot to have some of those trainings. I took the red button training last year, later in the year, and amazing, really, really helpful. And I would highlight sane, not perfect, because you're
Mm.
going to work things out depending on the trainer that you go with. You're going to have some things that you can resolve in the education part. Wow, which was really, really helpful and key.
And there's a great aspect as well of the IMT training, which is everything that is taught. And it's always taught from a position of we're training people to be practitioners to work with somebody else. But the reality is everything that is taught can be self-applied.
Yeah.
And that's why I say we get such a mixed bag of people coming on the trainings because it is perfect for people who want to self-apply stuff. And we all of it can be done. So,
And I will say there have been times where I didn't know if I'd be objective enough to do IEMT on myself. But certainly I was. There was one time I was coming home from a client session and I realized I felt a bit of a fraud. I was driving and I'd had this reaction ever since I was a little girl. And it's weird, but I would hear like the fire ambulance sirens, and immediately I would just start to cry no matter what I'm doing. And it was really not practical while driving. And I don't recommend doing this in traffic. But traffic had come to a stop, and I thought, am I really doing this to help other people? And I'm not going to address this ridiculous reaction. And I thought, let's just see where it goes. And I couldn't pinpoint where the memory was. So I just focused on what I was feeling in the moment, the reaction, and moving the eyes. And as I was doing that, the memory surfaced on its own. And it was a memory from driving with my mom on a highway, and there was a huge accident of an RV, and she gasped. She said, and that was the sound that like looped in my mind every time I'd hear the sirens. So it doesn't even have to be a visual flashback. That was very auditory, very kinesthetic. And yet I did one round of wiggling my eyes, focusing on that emotion, gone. Now I can hear them and I'm no response. Neutral
amazing.
as is ideal. So yeah, you don't have to come and work with other people, but this is an incredible opportunity to do some self-care in big situations. Yeah.
Definitely.
I can't thank you enough for your brilliance, your
It's been
genius,
my
your
pleasure, and
pure
thank you.
wizardry. And hopefully you'll come back again sometime and tell us about metaphors of movement, because
I
that is
would
a
love to,
whole
Amanda. Thank
other
you.
journey. All right. Thank you so much, Andrew. Thank you, ladies and gents. As always, stay happy, stay healthy, stay well, but most of all, stay inspired. Bye for now.
Thank you, everybody.